Welcome to our presentation on automotive cybercrime. My name is Naman Haq. I'm a senior threat researcher currently supporting VicOne's automotive cybersecurity research. Within the organization, I work for the Forward-Looking Threat Research Group, and our goal is to look into cyber threats in the next 2 to 5 years. First, a quick introduction to VicOne. VicOne is a new company founded in June 2022 as a 100% owned subsidiary of Trend Micro. This is a global cybersecurity company with over 500,000 commercial customers in 200 countries, including 9 of the top 10 automotive companies in the Fortune 500 list. VicOne focuses on automotive cybersecurity and delivers a broad portfolio of cybersecurity software and services for the automotive industry with a vision to secure the vehicles of tomorrow, today. As a Trend Micro subsidiary, VicOne is powered by a solid foundation in cybersecurity drawn from Trend Micro's 30 plus years of experience in the industry. So for many people in the security industry, the field of automotive security is seen as a relative recent one. For us, however, it's something we have a long history of exploring from many angles. Going all the way back to 2015, we did a publication on Wi-Fi weaknesses in Skoda vehicles. And we have looked at everything from attacks inside the vehicle itself to attacks on the wider smart transportation ecosystem. We've also looked at standards such as WP29 and ISO 21434. We have also covered the topic many times at industry events. We've also given away Tesla Model 3s to participants who have successfully demonstrated how to compromise them at our Ponto events. And recently, we spoke about the WP29 regulations that are coming up at the SAE World Congress. If it comes to automotive security or automotive hacking, you name it, we have looked at it or are looking into it. But absolutely none of that is relevant for what I'm going to talk about today. So to start off, automotive hacking is not equals to automotive cybercrime. While hackers may show off impressive technical attacks at security conferences that go deep into the vehicle's internal systems, such as automotive Ethernet or CAN bus, and which kind of like goes into like the famous case of Charlie Miller infamously remotely driving a hacked Jeep off the road, right? But a cybercriminal does not really care about any of that. When we talk of car cybercrime, we talk of business models for financial crime that can apply fully remotely and are realistic right now. And none of these impressive hacks fit those criteria. Over the years, we have seen cybercrime emerge on desktop, mobile platforms, cloud, IoT, and now starting in automotive. And it always follows 3 key criteria. New cybercrime must be financially profitable, and in most cases, it must be of greater or equal to the other sources of cybercrime before it really takes off. Cybercrime must be scalable. This means that there must be a critical mass of targets, such as vehicles in our case. The attacks should be possible to carry out remotely from the other side of the planet. There are many researchers who are showing attacks of how to compromise vehicles using Wi-Fi. But even if that allows the theft of an expensive vehicle, it does not scale to the millions per year that is required for a serious organized cybercrime group to start investing in there. Another thing with cybercrime is that there needs to be low barrier for entry. Crime is like water, not fire. It flows through a defense looking for the single easiest crack. The Jeep hack we showed earlier took a full year of research from 2 very smart researchers. But crime, by definition, is all about getting the maximum return for the least effort. Otherwise, they would have legitimate careers. So from almost a fire triangle that we can constantly monitor to see if crime will accelerate, all 3 need to be in place. But here is the most important takeaway from this talk. When automotive cybercrime really takes off, it will start as a slow burn. But when all 3 criteria really are in place, it will explode. There's no copyright in cybercrime, which means when one criminal figures out how to do something, every criminal knows how to do it. So what does cybercrime do? So what sort of cybercrime do we see that fulfills these 3 conditions on automotive today? On the profitable side, we can say that we have not seen any financially profitable cybercrime business model deployed to date. However, this is not a cause to be relaxed, and it's far from it, actually. We're really already seeing traditional cybercrime spill over into the automotive world with major effects such as those discussed on Reuters here related to Denso. Back in 2021, the Rook ransomware group announced that Denso, which is a major supplier among many of the OEMs in the industry, had been compromised, and then they proceeded to leak a massive 1.1 terabytes of information to criminal sites. Denso were targeted yet again 3 months later by a group calling themselves Pandora Ransomware. Based on threat intelligence into the actors behind both of these criminal groups, we assess that they're actually one and the same. Also in March, an even more impactful attack happened when another major supplier in Japan, Kojima, were victims of what appears to be a ransomware attack. Only discussing the reports that were in the public domain, this appears likely to be the result of an initial infection with the Emotet malware, which we assess to be solely used by the Conti ransomware group. The impact of this event was that a major manufacturer suspended operations of 28 lines in 14 plants across Japan for a number of days, affecting the output of around 13,000 vehicles. So while neither of these attacks directly target the automotive side of the company's operation, we foresee a number of changes happening here in the future, which we'll outline shortly. Both show the automotive supply chain is most definitely seen as a lucrative target for today's elite cybercrime groups, and we expect more tailored attacks towards this industry to evolve. For scalability, an initial reaction that may have is that not many people are yet driving smart cars or EVs, at least compared to computer users, for example, and such that the attack surface is lower. That is, of course, true, but the number is rising. And also, of all the parts of the pyramid, that is actually the least important is the scalability for two key reasons. Cars are high value enough that criminals can adapt to more targeted big game hunting business models, where instead of looking to monetize tens of thousands of victims for a reasonable sum of money, they can look to monetize hundreds for larger amounts of money. And secondly, there are some very obvious big targets, the vendors themselves. As evidenced by the ransomware scenarios, there is potentially millions to be made here in extortion. Ransomware is only a damaging attack here, however. Threatening brand damage is another big one, and one great way to do that, which is 100% possible, 100% possible today, is through data leakage. So here's an example from one of our fleet management aftermarket vendors. Needing only a license plate number and no authentication, an attacker can pull full historical GPS location data, speed at each point, which could be compared to limits in the same location, duration of drives, etc. So here's another unauthenticated example from what appears to be an aftermarket vendor of raw GPS data plus speed. The important thing to highlight here is precision down to around 10 centimeter. The key here is not whether the data is from a vehicle component or aftermarket vendor. It's that the data on its own is not actually valuable for a criminal. But gathering gigabytes of data from a vendor and threatening to push out a message of criminals can see your car movements with only your VIN or license plate can be a PR nightmare for a vendor or a supplier who's responsible for the telemetry. Most company boards would consider a large payment to avoid the negative publicity. So on to low barriers for entry, and we have the area with the most worrying developments. We said earlier, no criminal wants to spend months or longer of research to compromise a target, but in a lot of cases, attackers do need to. There are several areas they can draw on. First is the feature unlock scene, which is growing. A modern vehicle is capable of much more than you initially paid for, and additional features can often be paid for after initial purchase and rolled out via, an over-the-air update to the vehicle. Naturally, there's a big car enthusiast scene out there, and that has no interest in paying for something they could potentially get for free with some ingenuity or theft, just like the music or video piracy scene. They also offer services such as removing crash information from a car. But what is worrying is that we already have started seeing an overlap of this world and the cybercrime fraud. Here's an example from March 2022. Criminals were able to use their tried and trusted techniques of account theft to compromise dealer login details to the Volkswagen dealer portal, and from their enable functions on demand for select vehicles of their choosing. And this led to Volkswagen having to shut down the entire dealer portal until they could build something more secure. Here's another example that seems even less worrying initially. Tesla made as a self-hosted data logger and visualization tool for your Tesla vehicle, and popular in the scene for those who love to update or monitor their cars. But what's concerning about logging details like charge level or outside temperature, right? So the concern is the same, is that the same API credentials that allow you to pull data from the vehicle also let you send commands to the vehicle. In this case, it was trivial to do a scan of the internet for all the installed and exposed Tesla-made instances, compromise them with default credentials, extract the API tokens, and then issue commands to the vehicle themselves, such as unlocking the vehicle or even engaging keyless driving. Thankfully, in this case, the attacker was not motivated by financial gain, but it shows this emerging threat vector and how trivial it is. This is exactly the sort of crime a criminal favors, that targets the user level or the already authenticated user instead of deep technical attacks. We know that attackers will look to do what all your authenticated users will do, but essentially without permission. Many vendors today provide apps and web-based portals for their latest vehicles that, among other features, include remote lock, unlock, remote window control, disable the alarm, start the vehicle, etc. Sometimes these are available only to a SOC or emergency team, but increasingly they're available to the owner of the vehicle. Criminals love this type of feature where the only thing preventing them having the same control over a resource as the legitimate user is as trivial as stealing a password, something which they have turned into an art form over the last 25 years. So as a rule of thumb, if a simple password is all that is used to authenticate your users, assume all accounts could be compromised. Another sign that the car cybercrime is on the cusp of evolving is posts such as these two, one for loosely related topics such as car sharing fraud, and the other one for more specific tools that allow unlock and start of older models of Tesla cars. These two are just a handful of several in this emerging topic. But what is most important is not the content, it is where they're posted. Both of these appear on Doublycat, a criminal forum selling everything from stolen documents and passwords to malware and stolen credentials. There is no type of modern cybercrime not discussed in this forum, and it will only be a matter of time before the right criminals come together and this trend accelerates. So that is a look at some of the emerging automotive cybercrime we see today. But what about in the next 1 to 3 years? Where are things likely to go next? First of all, this is really important to understand, and it's the sort of crime you expect to affect vehicles will most likely be drastically different from the reality of what you face. Criminals do not think like those in the automotive industry, or even the researchers and white hat hackers who target them. As an example, let's look back at the last big evolution in cybercrime, the emergence of cybercrime for IoT. So go back a few years and you will find many publications on how criminals would take over your smart fridge and ransom your food or your smart TV to spy on you, or even a factory to cause chaos. Do you know which of these happened in reality? None of them. And if you understand cybercrime, that is exactly what you would expect. Cybercriminals stick to what they know works, and that's hacking computers. So just like with IoT, the first wave of automotive cybercrime will treat the vehicles and the related ecosystem not as vehicles, but simply as computers. So what sort of attacks could we expect as a result? For the sake of this talk, let's oversimplify. cybercrime into three main categories of threats. Those motivated by emotion, those motivated by espionage, and those motivated by financial gain. For those motivated by emotion, such as a jealous spouse, the future attack is very obvious to predict. In fact, we've already seen the early versions of it. Look at this headline. A simple tracking device like Apple AirTags are already being hidden by stalkers and spouses alike to track people, predominantly women. But a modern vehicle is already a tracking device. They gather an enormous amount of data, such as exact locations visited, but also have internal microphones, cameras, and everything else that a stalkerware or spyware program would need. Initially, we would expect these sort of attacks to be carried out by those who have physical access to a vehicle by, say, USB or OBD2 ports. But as we have already seen from some of the car apps and portals, this data is often available with simple login. The risk to the victim of stalkerware cannot be overstated. In the Windows cybercrime world, it has led to loss of life from both suicide and murder of those being tracked. On the espionage front, there's a doomsday scenario where a foreign spy agency hacks an important dignitary's vehicle and remotely drives them off the road, killing them. While this makes for a great James Bond movie, it's very inefficient in reality. First of all, the leaders of countries such as presidents, their vehicles are often a custom built one that would be very hard to attack. However, the next level down normally have standardized fleet of vehicles from one or two providers. Also, in most cases, simple drive-by shooting is more effective, or poison when deniability is required. Remember, it needs to be easier than other methods to be reasonable. What would certainly be in scope for a spy agency, however, is fine. Well, when we see the first primitive stalkerware crime kits for vehicles used by the emotionally motivated attackers we just spoke about, expect to have much more sophisticated APT level versions created for espionage purposes. These threats will not be discovered for years, and after deployment, maybe 5+ years, until they also end up on a car with modern software, security software installed. And even then, it will be tricky to find. So finally, motivation, financial motivation. On the financial front, there are many attack scenarios, but let's highlight two major ones out of dozens that we have explored internally, which we think are some of the most likely for criminal use. One of the first that will spring to mind, given its success in the computer world, is ransomware. Here the attack scenario seems trivial. Lock up a car and prevent it from moving unless the ransom is paid. How this is implemented can depend a lot, both in how it's presented to the user and how it's deployed. We don't think a ransomware attack will target the consumer or owner of a vehicle. What is more lucrative is a vendor-targeted attack scenario. In this case, the attacker would deploy ransomware on as many vehicles as possible, but not trigger the ransomware or to activate it. They would then target the vendor with a demand for a very large ransom, 8-figure ransom to be paid in a period of 2 to 3 days, or they would trigger the ransomware, or worse, a wiper that would permanently cause damage to the vehicles and trigger full mass recall. The payment time will be set to carefully to give the victim vendor enough time to admit defeat, but not enough time to actually fix the damage, especially as attackers will aim to disable the ability for any sort of remote cleaning. How many vendors and suppliers have a playbook in place already for the C-level to respond to an incident like this? Like, not many, right? In reality, this is one case where a strong security solution, such as a combination of IDPS and central SOC, is needed in advance to the attack. Okay, our second scenario is a car theft at scale. As strange as it sounds, stealing a single car is not really in the interest of a serious organized crime group. Why do they need to steal? What they need to do is steal thousands globally, right? And how did they do that? So how will this scenario play out? Actually, it's quite simple, and the business model for that that needs to exist already exists today. The cybercrime group would first have to amass as many stolen credentials for remote access to cars as possible. There are many ways to do this, ranging from keyloggers in computers, social engineering, website compromise, phishing, purchase from other criminals, etc., etc. The end result will be a large pool of vehicles from one vendor spread globally. Then what they'll do is they'll work with a local organized crime group in dozens of countries simultaneously. The criminals must prove that they're beside the car by taking a photo and sending it to the organized crime group, at which point the criminals will remotely unlock the vehicle, disable alarms and cameras, and if possible, engage keyless driving. The gang will then simply drive away with the cars and proceed to process them for illegal sale via long, refined black market methods, right? Keeping an agreed percentage and sending the rest to the ringleaders. If all of this seems far-fetched and unfeasible, it sadly really isn't. So, to summarize, we have talked through the triad of cybercrime and how it applies to automotive crime both today and how it helps us to predict what will come in the near future. So as we said before, when automotive cybercrime starts off, it'll start as a slow burn, but when all three criteria are really in place, it will explode. So we want to ensure that this does not become the case in automotive. To do this, we recommend a phased approach. First, automotive threat intelligence should be considered as the baseline protection technology that can prevent, detect, analyze, and respond to threats. As the world of mobility continues to evolve, a more comprehensive and future-oriented cybersecurity strategy will need to be enabled so car stakeholders can stay ahead of imminent cybersecurity threats. Phase one is the adoption of Vehicle Security Operations Center, VSOC. This allows OEM to understand context of attacks and take the necessary actions. This is a good starting point. However, the protection level is very limited in reality. That means it's hard to prevent sophisticated attacks from succeeding. Phase two is the adoption of vulnerable and SBOM management. This gives OEMs greater visibility over undisclosed vulnerabilities. This also gives VSOC a central visibility for vulnerability and SBOM. And once a new attack behavior of vulnerability is found in vehicles, the VSOCs can assess impact, scope, and conduct fast response. Phase three is the adoption of IDPS for critical ECUs. This supports VSOCs as an intelligent sensor and provides real-time protection for ECUs. At this stage, vehicles are protected from attack in real time. Important points to remember is that IDPS needs to be implemented in the vehicle design phase. That means it takes years to be implemented. Therefore, adoption has to be decided early on before the cybercrime becomes reality. So for phase one, VicOne offers XNexus, a DR platform for VSOC. For phase two, we have XZeta, which provides vulnerability assessment and prioritization, and SBOM to help OEMs manage vulnerabilities. And for phase three, we have XCarbon, which provides detection against ECU and in-vehicle network inclusions. With these solutions, we support to support three phases that are designed to be able to integrate with each other. VicOne supports OEMs to expand their security level as cyber threats evolve, all the while reducing the total cost of ownership. So we also offer other solutions covering design to operation phases and product life cycles. For more information, please contact us through the live chat in our virtual booth, or please visit us at our virtual and physical booths. Thank you very much.